Hey everybody, I'm Nick. This is my channel, and this is my first video, and I'm just doing this on my phone, so I apologize for any audio video issues, but it's not going to look awesome. But just wanted to get this uploaded, and I want to talk about my early history doing RPGs, and specifically this video I'm going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and my early history playing Dungeons and Dragons. Um, and It's the game that most people start with, and I started with it. I've been gaming or playing tabletop role playing games since 1982, basically. And I haven't played consistently that whole time. There's certainly been years where I didn't play, various periods away from the games. But it's something I always come back to, and it's my favorite hobby. It's the thing I enjoy doing the most in terms of just being getting together with people and doing stuff. That's something I just really enjoy doing it. And the game I started with was D&D. Why did and how that came about is pretty interesting, I think. Basically happened because of a single page in the Sears catalog, which was a page that said at the top of the page, enter the world of adventure gaming. Because on this particular page, they had all these kind of unusual fantasy games. And they weren't just role playing games. That's probably why they used the term adventure gaming. Because there was Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop game put out by TSR Hobbies, was there. They had both the basic set and all the D&D hardbacks, I believe, were on there. They also had a couple of other kind of odd little D&D items. They had Dark Tower, which was a Milton Bradley board game, was on that same page, uh, which had a electronic Dark Tower and something. I never had the game, but it looked really cool, and I always wanted it. So partly because it was on that page. And then they also had the D&D Dungeons and Dragons Mattel Electronics game, which I got eventually. And it was the thing actually I wanted the most. I most wanted that game because it was this like electronic game, and it had these cool little metal figures and everything. And I was kind of entranced by the metal figures. Ultimately, I think I kind of realized that like I wasn't as entranced by the electronic game. I was more entranced by the figures than the game. So the figures were kind of the thing that drew me in. Um, and the electronic game came with four figures. It came with a dragon. It came with it didn't look super good, but it was like this rearing up kind of serpentine like dragon. It had two warriors and a treasure chest, and your two warriors would you and another player could go through this dungeon. You would move through the board, and it was an electronic set of squares, these little plastic squares, and you would press down on them, and they were like a button, and it would give you a sound to indicate to you what was in that space. If it gave a kind of a dead sound, that means there was like you couldn't go in that space. There was a wall there, so you would put up these little plastic walls that they put in the that you had, and you could put them up, and so the dungeon gradually took shape as you moved through it, and eventually you were trying to find the treasure before you ran into the square where the dragon was, because he was invisible. You didn't know where he was until you ran into him, and then suddenly he's there on the board. And then it's usually at that point too late, that like the dragon is going to kill you pretty much once you run into him in that game. I played it a bunch of times. I played it with my dad a little bit, and it was fun, but it ultimately wasn't the thing that got me into the hobby in any way, because it wasn't a role playing game. It was just this electronic game, which I still have it. It's kind of neat. It has looks like a big castle thing, whatever. It's got this board in the middle in the center that has all these very evocative looking illustrations on the little squares you move around on. There's like spiders and other things like that on the picture on the little squares. And then what happened is there was the basic set was on there also, which was, and at the time, this is 1982, so this was the basic set that was there. This is the Tom Moldvay set. Here's the rule book that was inside that. Um, and this is some people refer to the basic set box. This is the second basic set box after Eric Holmes's blue box, I guess is what sometimes people call that first one. Some people refer to this box as the red box, but that actually is not true. As you'll see, it's the well, the book inside of it is red. The box itself is kind of magenta or kind of purplish or dark pink, whatever. Anyway, but it's not a blue box, and or not a red box rather. That term came in because the edition after this is the Frank Mincer edition, which is in a red box, and that has the Larry Elmore, I think it's Larry Elmore cover, and people just really remember that cover, right? You know, and the red box, and it really leapt out at them, and that came out in '83, and it was the most popular and most widely distributed version of Dungeons and Dragons. I believe in Europe, for example, like that is the first edition that they got, right? You know, like that was one of the first versions that in some countries they had, right? So a lot of people just remember the red box, right? And it was a revised version of the box that I just showed you, the Moldvay set, which was written by Tom Moldvay, and then they had the sequel set, which was the expert set that came after it, right? So you had the basic set and then the expert set, which I also have that as well, but the basic set was the first thing I got, and it's only levels 1 to 3, and it was a great game. It was pretty straightforward. Like I kind of understood what this was. It told you what to do. It came with a module. B2 Keep on the Borderlands was in the box that I got, and it came with a set of dice that you had to color in the numbers with a crayon and wipe off the thing, so it left a little thing in the little indented area where the number was. And it was fun. I still have my original dice actually too. They don't roll really well. They're all worn down because they were kind of cheap plastic. But I still have those. And so that happened, and I did I basically wanted this stuff for Christmas. I got the basic set. I got the Mattel Electronics game. Those are like my big things I really wanted for Christmas that year. And then right around the same time, like I think maybe just even a little before this, or during the time I was like looking at the page on the Sears catalog thing, I got curious about the game because a friend of mine, he brought like the Keep on the Borderlands module to school with him, and showed it to me, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, what is this? And he opened it up, and the map, the map there of the Caves of Chaos was there, this dungeon map, and I was like, what? So I still really didn't understand how the game worked. So I was like, so do you just like move your pieces around on this or something, or does the DM just track where you're moving on this? And basically that's what happens. But he was like, yeah, you just like imagine it, like you don't get to see the map. The dungeon master sees the map, and then he just like describes to you what's happening. And I was like, oh. And then he explained to me that you could like go off the map too, that there was like a whole other map that was like a wilderness that like was the area around the dungeon and stuff. And I was like, what? And I was like, so you could just go anywhere? And he was like, yeah, as long as you're like wandering around the map, that's fine. And I just thought that was crazy. I was like, that's better than a board game. And so I fell in love immediately. I was like, oh hey, this is great. And plus also it had so many things I loved in it already, like monsters and you know knights and things like that, like running around fighting things. That all sounded magic. Like it all sounded really cool. I was a giant fan of The Hobbit, already. I'd seen the animated film when I was a kid, and just kind of like that was my one of that, and like King Arthur were like things I was obsessed with. And then eventually I did read The Hobbit, but that was like around. I started reading The Hobbit like it was a little bit after actually I got my D&D thing. So it was like within the next year or two, I got Dungeons and Dragons, and then I read The Hobbit, and then read Lord of the Rings, like not long after. But So he showed me that stuff at school, but then that stuff he had brought to school wasn't his. He didn't own the basic set or the Keep in the Borderlands module, and but I really wanted to play, and I was like, we should play, and so we did kind of, but we just kind of made it up. So like he drew like a dungeon on like a piece of construction paper that we had at school, and it just had like a pencil, and not even graph paper, just like, and he put little squares in. So he like drew a little corridor and then put little lines there, just to sort of, so it looks vaguely like, okay, here's the square, even though they were kind of rectangles. And the rooms were all not perfectly squares, and things like that. But it was a dungeon, right? He drew a dungeon, and then we went through it, and we didn't have any funny dice. So I brought like a six-sided dice that was from like a Yahtzee set, or a set that I don't know what it was, but it was like I got a six-sided dice from some board game or something that my parents had lying around the house, and so I brought that. To school, and we used like this six-sided dice. We just like rolled it, and I think he just said like, "Oh, if you roll a 5 or a 6, then you like hit them." And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't. And we had like hit points. I think he also just made us roll the dice once to see how many hit points we had. And so I had like 4 hit points or whatever, right? And I think that was the only thing I had noted, was that I had like 4 hit points, and then I had a sword, but I didn't really have a character sheet, I don't remember, and I didn't give the character a name or anything like that. We just literally, and then we just literally went through the dungeon, and we were like, it was like kind of like it was me just going through dungeon fighting or something like that. I didn't even know like what you were supposed to imagine you were somebody else. Like that whole thing, the idea of role playing any of this never came up, right? We just were like, oh, you're just like this thing. And I guess, from the artwork, I could tell like, oh, you're supposed to be imagining you're like this knight or something like that, or you're supposed to be this warrior or wizard or whoever you want to be. But I wasn't thinking about playing this person like as a character, really. That really hadn't penetrated yet. But we were put in these like situations where we had to like deal with stuff. So like, I remember like falling in a pit, in the hallway. It was a pretty typical D&D kind of thing. You fall in a pit. Oh no, I'm in a pit, and I took damage, I'm sure. And then we would go into each room and we would fight a monster. There'd be like a monster in that room, and then you fight it, and then you would get treasure, because there was treasure in every room. Basically, he just had treasure in every room. So we were like, and he would, I forget, it wasn't like a ton of treasure necessarily, but it was like, and then he would like have stuff in there. Maybe there'd be a magic item in there or something like that. I'm turning this off because I should maybe keep that on. There's adding a little bit of light. Sorry, I had this screen on and it was like, there we go. Now what's it doing? There we go. Sorry, it's glaring on my glasses probably a little bit, but I think it's adding a little bit of light here, and if I turn it off, my whole side of my face is going to be in shadow. Anyway, but we were talking. We were just going through and fighting all these monsters and things. It was pretty fascinating, and I was so hooked after that. I really enjoyed it. We did this in the middle of English class, no less. So we were playing in the middle of English class. I don't know what our teacher was thinking. She must have just been ignoring us. Like, she probably knew what was going on, but she was just ignoring us. She clearly was just like, okay, they're not being disruptive, and they're just doing this thing. Eventually, she did come over, I think, and rather sternly warn us that like we need to get doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so we were like, okay, yeah. And then we stopped playing D&D. I think we tried to play at lunch maybe once or twice after that, but it didn't really work out. It wasn't something that at lunchtime D&D wasn't a thing. Later on, I would try to play it again, but it was always kind of. I remember in fifth grade later on trying to run Dwellers of the Forbidden City at lunchtime for somebody, and it was kind of a mess because like the wind was blowing and like it was like trying to hold the screen up, and it was kind of a mess. So like I did not playing outside was never a good thing. But you would just kind of play where you could, you know. So um, anyway, I very quickly, maybe unfortunately, moved on to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons after the basic set, and after my friend and I we had did this kind of experimental D&D. Um, and I very quickly picked up this, which is my copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide, which was the first D&D book AD&D book I bought. I didn't buy the Player's Handbook. So I had this, and I had some Dragon magazines, and I had the basic set, and and that's what I was using basically to run the game. Eventually, I never got the expert set when I was younger. Eventually, I got the Player's Handbook, but it wasn't mine. Actually, it was a friend of mine. This is pretty typical, I think. Also, he bought the Player's Handbook because we were gonna like. It was like I had the Dungeon Master Guide. He figured he'd buy the Player's Handbook, but his mom like didn't like. She thought the game was like evil or something. So he was like, "Can I keep my book at your house?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." And so basically, it was my book, even though his name is literally written in the book. And so I just hung on to it. I still have that book. Yeah. Um, but the person in question is unfortunately has passed away. Yeah, I still have his player's handbook. Um, anyway, so I think that's a good overview. But the AD&D game, when we played it, we did not understand. I did not really understand like the full context of the rules. I didn't really understand how to play very well. I basically just kind of used the basic rules that I did have a sense of how that worked, and then also there were rules that people had like told me that there were rules that people had told me. My cat is scratching at the door right now. Anyway, so things are going on. I can hear, but it's okay. Uh, um, anyway, but so we just didn't know what we were doing, and things didn't go well. Um, I think with AD&D, we played actually for a while, and I just was kind of faking it, you know, because like I didn't understand the initiative rules. I would read them, you know, but then I would like read other stuff and I would get confused, you know, and there was like stuff that I was like chase rules and things in there, and I didn't understand how those fit in. And there was a lot of stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide in particular that's rather esoteric, and I didn't understand the Dungeon Master's Guide is basically just a gigantic toolbox, that it's like Gary Gygax is sort of saying like, here's all of these tools, use them as you need them, don't use these all necessarily at one time, you don't have to use all this stuff. I didn't kind of understand that, and so it affected. I always thought I was doing something wrong, so like I felt like I really wasn't using the rules right, and then also I think I ignored lots of rules, which lots of people do. There's lots of rules we never used, right? We never used, like, I never used the psionic rules. We never used any of the weapons versus armor rules. There's a lot of things in there we just didn't use them. Um, so, um, and I think that's pretty typical of people playing the game. So, all right, well, I think that brings me to the end of pretty much what I wanted to talk about. And we'll maybe come back later. So in part two, I'm going to talk about kind of what I played after Dungeons and Dragons, because I kept playing D&D. I played second edition, and I've played every edition basically. That's come out. I played third edition briefly. I played fourth edition for a little bit, and I'm now playing fifth edition currently. And I mostly run games, but I often mostly running games. I'm often the DM or the GM of whatever it is we're playing. But sometimes I do play, and I do really enjoy playing games. So, anyway, that's it for me for now, and take care. All right, thank you.